Welcome to Brain Chat. I'm Dr. Mitzi Joy Williams, your board-certified neurologist and MS specialist, and my mission is to engage, educate, and empower those affected by MS to become an active part of their healthcare team. Here on Brain Chat, we'll be discussing all things MS, health and wellness, advocacy, and we'll even throw a little bit of music and music therapy in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Happy Monday, everybody. It's Dr. Mitzi, the nerdy neurologist, and I am so excited to be here with you for today's Brain Chat. I bid you greetings from New York City. I'm on location, I guess, so to speak, but I have an amazing guest with me today, and we are talking about mental health and wellness, which is really important, I think, for everyone, but particularly for those dealing with a chronic condition like multiple sclerosis. You know how we do on Brain Chat. Go ahead and type in the chat and let us know where you are viewing us from. As I said, I'm here in New York, and Dr. Jackson is in Atlanta, my hometown that I left today. But we're very excited about today's episode. Mental health awareness is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I figured what better way to kick off the month than to have a talk about mental health awareness and multiple sclerosis. So I see some folks logging in from Chicago. I see Texas. I see Columbus, Ohio. Hi, guys. I see you. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And I see Atlanta, Locust Grove. I know exactly where that is. All right, so let's get the party started. I'm going to introduce my wonderful guest, Dr. Christy Jackson, who is a board-certified psychiatrist. She graduated from Morehouse School of Medicine, my alma mater, and we also went to Emory University together as well. She is an adult psychiatrist, and she's also a medical director in utilization review and management. And I cannot wait to get into today's discussion. Welcome, Dr. Jackson. You are a Brain Chat pro, so you know how this works. All right. So while we're getting started, I also want to thank our sponsors, Biogen, IDEC, and the National MS Society. All right. Very good. So mental health, wellness, is so important. So first, tell us how you got interested in psychiatry, and how you got started in working, in the mental health space.
Ooh, that's a scandalous question.
Well, just give us the clean version.
Honestly, when I went to, and you may not remember this, Miss, when I wanted to go to medical school initially, I went to school to be an OBGYN. Psychiatry was nowhere near.
I didn't know that.
Yes, ma'am. I was trying to find a cure to ovarian cancer and do all the pap smears and eradicate preventable STDs or now STIs. My interest in psychiatry actually started when I did my rotation at Georgia Regional Hospital, which I'm sure you survived and remember.
I did. I was about to say, that's when mine ended, honey.
Absolutely. So you're a mess. So I did the rotation, survived it. It was like my second rotation, and I actually saved OB towards the end of my schedule. And I found that after I evaluated all the clinical rotations that we did in school, I realized that psychiatry was the only subject matter that no matter how I felt, I never got tired of doing the reading, right? Of course, when we're in medical school, there you got to go do the work and then you got to go home and learn on your own, essentially. And so no matter how tired I was, and sometimes scared, because this was the state psychiatric hospital, sometimes I came home and I was scared. I was always intrigued. So I decided to lean into that and didn't look back. So here I am.
That's amazing, and so I had a couple of different thoughts as well when I was going through med school. So before I went to med school, I wanted to be a pediatrician. And then I actually also wanted to be a psychiatrist, but I love neurology as well. And so I love the brain. And so neurology kind of gave me a little bit of psychiatry plus, a little bit of something else. It's a whole lot more than I thought. But it was a great choice. So, we're kind of like sister cousin specialties. So very cool. All right. So let's talk about mental wellness. What does that mean, right? So I think that, in recent years, there's become increasing focus, from, wellness, not just being the physical aspect of health, right? We know you need to work out. We know you need to drink water, exercise, and, eat a healthy diet, do all the things. But I think that there's increasing focus on the mental and emotional aspect of our health and how it's so interconnected with our physical health. So, what does mental wellness mean to you?
Sure. In my opinion, I believe that the most important part of mental wellness is knowing when something is not right for you, meaning
Mhm.
off balance for you or not okay for you. So it's less about this perception that people who are mentally well don't have any issues, they don't struggle with anything, they float on clouds all day long.
Mhm.
False. In my opinion, a picture of mental wellness is almost like, you know how you'll have a car and it has like little alerts to let you know if your tire is low on air. If
Right.
all the sensors are working, to me,
Mhm.
that's a better description of mental wellness. Not that you're
Mm.
okay all the time, but most importantly, if something is not okay, or if something needs to be checked into, that you have presence of mind to circle back or figure out what it is, and to know when to scream, not necessarily literally, but to
Right.
holler, scream for help.
Right. I love that, because I think, so many times, like with the analogy you made with our cars, right? That check oil light is on. Or, oh, let me give you a better example. That gas meter, right? Y'all know how y'all do. That gas is down to E, and you
Yes,
see it's at 10 miles and you just gonna
yes,
keep on pushing, and then
yes,
next thing you know you sitting in your driveway out of gas, right? And so
yes.
a lot of times I think people ignore those signs, so I love the fact, that it's not just about, you don't have to be happy all the time. It doesn't mean you don't have problems, but you have
Mm,
to have that awareness that, okay, listen, I'm on E, I'm past E, and I need to go get some gas, get refueled, get some extra help, in whatever form that looks like for me, so that I can, get my tank refueled, so to
yes.
speak. Yes, I think that that's extremely important, particularly in those with chronic diseases like, multiple sclerosis. Many people deal with things like depression and anxiety. Sometimes there are cycles, sometimes there are different points in life where you may be good and something happens, and, you may recover from that, but then you may hit something again. So I think it's also important to know that's very fluid, right? So it's not like you just kind of reach this plateau where you happy for the rest of your life after you get
Right.
over that one hump, that there's going to be some fluidity to that state.
Yeah.
So go ahead. You look like you're going to say something.
I was thinking about, I really feel like your analogy with the gas in particular hit the nail on the head.
Mm-hmm.
I think because there are times, for instance, sticking with your car analogy because it makes it less ouchy for folks. So you can be low on gas, but if you know that your engine is already raggedy, if you
Mm,
know that you have not had an oil change in God knows how long, and if you
mm-hmm.
know that somebody hit the back of your car and you never got it repaired, it is not wise to then, on top of that, let the red light come on every single time you run out of gas.
Right, right, right. To run on fumes all the time. Yeah, girl, we need to write a book about that. I mean, that should get in
It's
my
a thing. It's a
feel that
thing.
in my soul. But yeah, I mean, so true, right? But again, sometimes people are ignoring the signs. And I think, the point of this is, to let people know that it's okay to acknowledge
Yeah.
that there's something going on, that you're not okay, right? And it's okay to begin to seek out the help you need to try to deal with that.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, when we think about the attention and focus on mental health, we see a lot of celebrities now talking about mental health,
Mhm.
particularly in the Black community, right? Which is a relatively new thing. You hear guys or men talking about going to therapy and meditating. Do you feel like the attention and focus on mental health and a little bit of the stigma around mental health is improved in our community, or do you see that in the psychiatry space, or do we
Mhm.
still have a long way to go?
I think that it has, but I do believe that it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
So I'll say that it has improved because another new space where we hear these things talked about now, especially if we're talking about minority communities or different ethnic communities, even in religious spaces now, right?
Mhm.
We'll hear that there are churches that have counseling centers, or they'll connect you to one if you need
Mhm.
one, this and the
Mhm.
third. Of course, for people that work in psychiatry, there's nothing new about it. And we
Right.
don't perceive that there's that much, COVID aside, that
Right.
much of an uptick in some of the illnesses that we've been seeing.
Mhm.
But I will say that now there's a lot more emphasis on certain things, because I really think that the pandemic in particular showed us how not okay a lot of us really were.
Mm.
Now, the other side of that, where I say that it's a bit of a double edged sword, is this. I believe that on the one hand, I jokingly tell people there is so much free game on the internet. Like,
Right.
when we were in school, there was
Mhm.
no such thing as just going online and a therapist is on the internet just giving you stuff that people pay for free,
Right.
either
Right.
in written form or going live to talk about this, that, and the third. And so I
Mhm.
feel like it's a good thing that there's more information out there. But quite
Mhm.
as a step, I'm kind of sort of tired of seeing posts about trauma, toxicity, and narcissists when people, if you've never been in treatment, just stay
Right.
away from the language.
Right. Right. Right.
Because some people are just mean. It doesn't make them a narcissist. Some
Right.
things are just negative experiences that you had that doesn't qualify it as trauma. It's
Mhm.
teaching, but I have to tell the truth. And every
Yeah.
situation that's unhealthy is not necessarily toxic.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. I think that it's important. Sometimes there is an overabundance of information, and we run into that with MS, for instance. I have people coming in and using certain words. I'm like, that's not what that means. You know what I mean? I'm like, stay off of Google. You know what I mean? Or let me tell you what to Google. You know what I
And
mean?
where to look.
Exactly. So there sometimes can be an overabundance of information, and that's why it's important to have a connection with mental health specialists, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, etc., to help you to kind of navigate, right? Because just because somebody is saying certain words that may resonate with you,
Yes.
or even describing something that may be similar in some ways to what you have gone through or are going through, it doesn't mean that it's the exact same scenario, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it has the same outcome, doesn't mean that the way it needs to be approached is the same as that person, so
Sure.
every person is different. So I think it's important to kind of navigate. But you're totally right. There was no like go to Google and people on YouTube talking about stuff. Listen, we're friends in real life. Where you send me quotes all the time, I'm like, oh, that's kind of good. You know what I mean? That hit where it was supposed to hit. You know what I mean?
Hit and stuck, baby.
I'm telling you, hit, step, toes stepped on, all of that, right? But again, it's important to have a frame of reference to really navigate that
Yeah.
type of information and not use the internet as your therapy either.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you
Or
don't
your
want to go all the way.
journal.
You don't want to go all the way to the other extreme. So I mean, that's a
Absolutely.
really, really good point. So do you still think there is hesitancy for people to seek mental health
Yes,
professional services? So
there
you think
is.
there's still so even with all the stuff that we have, right? You can go online, you can do, I don't know what they call them, I'm not advertising any particular programs, but the online therapists, all this stuff. Even with all the resources and everyone talking about mental health, there's still a hesitancy.
There is. There's some places where services are more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've been contracted with a telehealth company for, let's say, about 6 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when I see people on there and they're presenting as if this is hard. Like,
Mm.
literally, you are sitting up in your bed, not because you can't get up, because I want to be crystal clear, not because your depression is so severe you cannot get out of bed, because that would be different.
Right, right.
But there are no shows in that space.
Wow.
There, and
Wow.
these are people that it's a part of their insurance benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Where it's
some
free.
cash pay, free-ish, but some people have a
Free-ish.
copay, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
always like to, when we talk about the cost of certain aspects of healthcare, I prefer to compare it to real life stuff, right? So, if
Right.
for those, I know a lot of your viewers are from all over, but for those that have ever been in the Metro Atlanta area, you and another human can easily spend $250 at Spondivits
Right.
and not even drink alcohol.
Right. Dinner.
Okay. So when we talk about someone, oh, they don't take insurance and their appointment is $200. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, if that means that we can't have, um, a set of braids that reaches our tailbone, which is more than $200, because we want to get because we want to get well, then so
Right.
be it. So it kind of
Right.
taught me to realize that some people are just not in a place where they're ready. Now, some
Right.
people go out there, they put their feelings out there, they go see a person. I've had people to come under my care that they saw somebody one time, found the person off putting, threw in the towel, never went back.
Mm,
It's not to undermine the fact that it took them to muster up all the courage they had to make that one appointment, and then they thought
right.
the provider, be it a therapist or even a psychiatrist, was a jerk. We get that.
Right.
But there are a lot of people that will tell you, I know primary care docs in other specialties, OBGYN, family medicine, which, they're kind of like the jacks of all trades. They
Hmm.
reach out, to try to at least get people situated, but they might make a referral and say, hey, we think you need to see a psychiatrist. And the follow through literally does not happen.
Mm, mm. So it's two things that you said that I want to circle back to.
Mhm.
So one was, the fact that there is access, but people have concerns about, costs. So we do know that the healthcare system, it can be very expensive,
Mhm.
but we prioritize the things that are most important to us.
Yeah.
So if something is extremely important, I've seen people pay out of pocket for different types of biofeedback,
Oh,
chiropractic therapy,
oh my,
or
my, my.
acupuncture, right?
Yeah, eggs.
So
I was just gonna say groceries, but
but
yeah, you're
listen,
right.
we talking about medical stuff,
Yeah,
right?
agreed.
Different herbs and all kinds of stuff, right? So again, it's about recognizing and prioritizing mental health and realizing that mental health in and of itself is important, but it absolutely affects your physical health. So when you
Yes.
come to your neurologist or your primary care doctor, you're like, my headaches won't go away or this won't go away, and we say is stress, right? That means we need to address the mental health issue or we'll never get the physical issues straightened out, right? So that needs to be prioritized just as much as if your chest was hurting, you would go to the ER, right? But you have all these signs that you're hurting mentally, but you're like, well, I'm just gonna.
But here's the thing, and let me know. I'm not supposed to interview you, but I am interested.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Child, I want to know.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's the same brain that can just make your arm not work one day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's the same brain that'll pull you off of a movie set, you know, with the access to the best healthcare the world has to offer, and had you laid up
Right.
in a hospital bed somewhere not
Absolutely.
being able to go back to work. So if
Absolutely.
it's the same brain that does that,
Right.
why is there less attention? Because if
Right.
that same brain doesn't get enough blood and a piece of it strokes out, we have an issue.
Right.
But for some reason, if that same brain has you laying in the bed, sending people to voicemail, not bathing for a week and a half.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I've heard so many different ways that people have addressed it. I think that a lot of it is that it's not something that has been emphasize, I think, particularly in our community, right?
Sure.
Particularly when you talk about, our religious circles, now there's much more openness in church to talk about therapy. Now they got shirts that say Jesus and therapy. Okay, I'm with it. You know what I mean? But traditionally, for many, that's not been the experience, and they feel like it's a sign of weakness, right? But I will tell you the first neurology patient that I saw as a intern was a young woman who had attempted, to harm herself,
Mm,
and she was unsuccessful in that attempt. But when she woke up in the hospital, she couldn't walk,
mm,
and so she had been in a wheelchair for a year. And so I go in to examine this woman and I'm like, oh my God, she's in a wheelchair. She can't walk. And I kind of get her up and she's almost falling down. And I go in with the neurologist and the neurologist starts talking to her and he tells her, I want you to do some exercise. I want you to move your leg. And she moved her leg. And I was sitting there with my mouth on the floor, like, what in the world? What happened? But that episode had so
yeah,
affected her, that she physically thought that she couldn't
right.
move, right? And so again, the brain has that much power. Now,
Yeah,
you can definitely have a physical stroke or something like that that literally makes you not move, but
sure.
your mind can really affect
Yeah,
your body to the point where you there are certain things that you're not doing
Yeah.
that you physically could do if
Yeah.
your mom's in a better state, you know. And so I think that people underestimate the seriousness of it.
Mm,
You know, and in the neurology space, we often get the intersection where there are physical things that are happening, and we have to kind of reconcile, okay, well, your brain looks great. So we got to figure out what's going on under here that we need to deal with, because your brain itself is nothing, you know, physically in your brain. It
mm,
looks perfect, you know. And so we often have to kind of reconcile those two things,
yeah.
um, and deal with it. But you know, I try to emphasize, listen, if your chest is hurting, you're gonna go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So if you're, you know, if all of this is going on, we need to figure out a way to address it, you know, so that we can
Yeah.
try to, you know, get you in better shape, so to speak. So when you have someone, you know, that has those signs, right? You know, and of course, you as a psychiatrist know better than me that there are different, you know, I won't say levels of depression, but you
Mm,
know, different severity. You know, some people are very functional, going to work, right, and
mm,
depressed, and some people can't get out of bed. You know, so when you see those signs, right, that your gas tank is on E, that you're not, you know, firing on all cylinders, so to speak. Where does someone start, right? If they want to try to seek help, right? Or get out of that brain space, where do they start?
Sure. If an individual is noticing that they're having trouble coping,
Mm-hmm.
or if you love someone, you see that they have trouble coping, I recommend that everyone start with therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that people kind of nod their head like, yeah, 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 and triggered. Sorry, add that to the list of words I'm tired of seeing on social media. Triggered. There.
Everybody is triggered by
Oh my
everything.
gosh, for everything. But the reality is, people are not in therapy. Like I've
Mm,
worked with a few, collaboratively with a few therapists. So I'm like, all right, now stay in your lane. But 98%
mm-hmm.
of them amazing to work with, are really good at separating the wheat from the tares, so to speak. There are
Mm-hmm.
some people that can present what they have going on to a therapist, and medication management might not necessarily be indicated or may not be indicated yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I remember a while ago knowing that my blood pressure was too high.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tell on yourself. Tell on
Okay,
yourself.
wait, and we already got there. Okay. So, and I'm talking about, I tried to do everything that I could to the point
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to take medication, even though clearly hypertension runs in my family. But literally exercised, like lost weight, pressure was still high.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, ended up consulting with an amazing nutritionist named
Mm-hmm.
Nicole Short. She helped me quite a bit. And even with that, I was able to see some gains, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, had I started earlier with the diet change, which meant almost eliminating salt from my diet,
Mm-hmm.
started earlier with regularly working out, it shouldn't have taken my blood pressure being like 160 over 90 something
Right. Right.
for me to then look into that. Had
Right.
I started at a lower level of engagement, if you will, not that that's
Mm-hmm.
not important, then
Right.
it might have been mitigated. The truth of
Right.
the matter is, sometimes people just don't want to talk. They
Right.
don't want to sit down across from somebody. They don't want to bring up all the things that are troubling them, or just bring
Mm-hmm.
up what their real life is like. There have been
Mm-hmm.
times where I've seen telehealth patients recently where they'll come and they're asking me for medicine. And when they tell me what they got going on, I'm like, first of all, simplify your life,
Right.
because you're stressing me out. Just listening to what you're saying is making my
Right.
life fast.
Right.
Pill is actually not going to fix that,
Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
if you eat medication and you live in chaos,
Right. It's
it's
not
not
going to
going to
fix it.
work your brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that if an individual has concerns they want to know, first of all, let the therapist dismiss you.
Mm-hmm.
Let the therapist tell
Don't
you,
dismiss
get
yourself.
out of here. Exactly. And secondly, if you're seeing, for instance, let's say you've had a primary care doctor, you have a great rapport with them, you've been seeing them for a while. True enough, the visit might be 10 to 15 minutes every however often you go see them. But
Mm-hmm.
they've been seeing you for 5 to 6 years of 10 to 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If you spontaneously start crying in their office and they ask you, are you okay? Don't lie.
Right. Don't lie.
Even if
Don't
they
do
don't
it.
have time to fix it, their time is very, very limited. Same for you. If you're Dr. Mitzi's patient from forever, she loves you very much, she cares about you. No, she doesn't necessarily have an hour to sit there and be your therapist in the moment. But if
Right.
you at least tell her the truth, she can at least shoot you some referrals for some people, maybe at least you can go talk to and
Right.
decide what the next step is going to be.
Right. And I think, we've talked about this before. People have to get okay with not being okay.
Yeah,
And when someone asks how you're doing, it's a reflex almost to
it
just say,
is.
I'm good. It's a reflex, even if it's not true. And oftentimes it's because we're talking to somebody in passing, and
Yeah,
at the end of the day, they may not really care how you're doing. So you're
sure.
just trying to get away. But when you're in those spaces, with people who can really help make a difference, it's important to be honest. Like
Yeah.
I can't, I mean, I don't think we can stress that enough. And so I want to circle back to something else that you said earlier, um, about, okay, let's say you say, all right, I'm having issues. I'm going to go see a therapist, and you see one that you don't like, right?
Yes.
It happens, right? But I
All
tell
the
people,
time.
okay, listen, I get my hair braided all the time. If I go see somebody and they do a bad job on my hair, number one, I'm not gonna go back, right? So you shouldn't keep going back if it's not a good experience, because you're not gonna get anything out of it. But number two, does that mean I'm never gonna get my hair done again?
Absolutely not.
Everything else in life, we have teams of people to help us stay fly, take care of our kids, do all the things, right? But when it comes to our health care, it's like, oh, I didn't like that one person, I'm never going
Yeah.
back, right? You're gonna find you a new nail tech, you're gonna find you a new hair, you're gonna find somebody else to do your brows, your lashes, all the things, right? And so if you encounter someone, even if it is, not an optimal experience, they may not be the best person for you. If it's not a
True.
right fit, that doesn't mean quit, right? That
Right.
means keep going, right? And then maybe that's a good time, particularly depending on how you found that person, to reach out to one
Mhm.
of your physicians or a member of your healthcare team to
Mhm.
ask for referrals. Because maybe you saw somebody online and you were like, okay, they look like they're talking good. Let me
Mm.
try them. And it wasn't a good fit. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's true. I would also like to say something that, people don't say a lot. If you don't, there's nothing wrong with telling the person what your concern is.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to disappear into the woods. So
Right.
at the end of the day, if there is something that makes you uncomfortable, without it, everyone, I only treat adults. I don't take care of kids no more. So if you are
Mm-hmm.
grown and you are having a conversation that you paid for
Right.
with another grown person,
Mm-hmm.
and there's something that is concerning, and you're really trying your best to make a positive change in your life, it's not the end of the world to let the person know, to say to them, when you said X, Y, and Z, it was a bit offensive, or I found it off putting. Because there's sometimes where people will bring their whole selves into that first appointment, and the kind of, I'm very direct with people, but I sleep well at night, number one, and I just respect people too much to take their money and lie to them.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, I often just mirror back to people some of what they give. I'm not talking about matching energy, let me be clear.
Right. Be
But if
clear.
they say a thing, I literally will say, hey, well, it sounds like you said that this, and this happened. And a lot of times people get offended because they literally don't want to be held accountable for anything.
Right.
When you're coming into a treatment alliance, either with a therapist, I'm not one in real life, so I can't speak on their behalf,
Mm-hmm.
or even with a psychiatrist or even your primary care doctor, they're not getting paid to tell you what you want to hear. They're getting paid to tell you the truth according to the medicine that they learned in school.
Right.
It doesn't have to align with your personal beliefs, right? If you are a person that is a Catholic, would it be amazing if your therapist were one also? Yeah, but now, if we're not talking about what happens right after you die, if we're here just talking about anxiety and you can have a conversation generally about higher power and not be offended,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that person can't treat you.
Right.
There was a lot of time in medicine where most physicians, especially in your field and definitely in mine, were white men.
Mm-hmm.
They were
Right.
always delivering babies, even in all fields of medicine. So at the end
Right.
of the day, you might not click on every gear with the person that's treating you initially.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's worth, at least, if there's something you find egregious, tell the person.
Mm-hmm.
You tell me all the time. Tell the
Mm-hmm.
person. Number one, you might be informing them of something that they need to be aware of.
Right. Right.
Number two, it could be an opportunity for you to practice standing up for yourself, because some
Mm-hmm.
you help because they have poor boundaries.
Mhm.
So everybody in the world runs you ragged, and then you come to the place where you're supposed to get help, and you don't have any boundaries in that dynamic either.
Right.
So instead of confronting, not necessarily in a hostile way, the
Mhm.
individual to say, I felt like you talked over me when I said dot, 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 dot.
Mhm.
Even if you never see them again after the
Right.
session after that, you've learned how to mitigate something that used to cause you anxiety.
Mhm. And I love that. We talk a lot on Brain Chat about patient empowerment, right? And when I think of patient empowerment and shared decision making, it's not necessarily like Burger King, like you go in
Yeah,
and tell somebody what you want and that's what you get, right? Because, each physician that you encounter has a level of expertise, that they bring to the table. But at the same time, you can also have a conversation, right? And if there are things that don't sit well with you or there are issues, that are concerning, you can address those. And if it's something that doesn't seem like it can be resolved, then maybe that is not the person for you. But in some cases, it may be something where they're like, okay, well, then let's reframe that, right? Or let's see how we can work around that. So I really love that idea of, having those conversations, not just walking away. Um, in your treatment process, particularly because in a lot of cases you may not be able to find somebody that looks exactly like you. For instance, if you're looking for, a Black neurology MS specialist, they're like 20 of us in the country. You know what I mean? So unless you live in certain parts of the country, you physically may not be able to find that, but it doesn't mean that there aren't, good, physicians who are, competent and able to take care of you. So
yeah,
I think that's a really important point. Thank you for bringing that out.
sure.
Now, let's think about a loved one, or a care partner, right? So, when we think about the healthcare team, oftentimes we think of the person or individual with the condition being at the center of that team. And oftentimes in the team, we think of medical professionals.
Yes,
But the healthcare, your care partner, right? Whether it's a spouse, whether it's another family member, whether it's a best friend, is also a part of that team. And
yes,
so, one thing that I often stress with my patients is to incorporate them in some of those visits, right? They may not need to be a part of all of them, but they often may have a different perspective. Sometimes they may see things that you may not be as aware of or bring things to your attention. And so, what does that loved one do if they see someone, having difficulty or showing maybe some signs of depression that they maybe don't seem to be dealing with or don't seem to be attempting to seek help for?
yeah.
How do they kind of approach helping that person?
Very strategically.
Hmm.
So I'm assuming that you mean a care partner who is in front of you as the doctor because they have
Yes.
been invited to attend the appointment with the patient.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
The reason why I say strategically is because obviously, Dr. Mitzi is the patient's neurologist, but whoever that human is that's in there with them still has to engage with them in real life outside of these sporadic appointments with the neurologist. If the care partner or the loved one, for instance, is a spouse, they have already said that they're going to be with you, even with this diagnosis that you guys, neither of you saw coming, and you are now here. However, their quality of life matters too. I would say
Hmm.
for that individual that's there with the loved one and they have concerns, to not necessarily, you do want to avoid embarrassing the other person, but I do
Hmm.
believe it's okay to ask questions, number one, for your own learning. If they
Hmm.
bring, when I used to see patients and they would show up with somebody in there, I would literally say to them, if you're bringing someone in here, this is implied consent. So I'm
Hmm.
not going to mince my words and
Right.
tiptoe around things if you've brought this other human in here. So I think that is an amazing opportunity for the care partner to raise different questions about different things, not to eat up the appointment,
Right.
but to strategically drop a question like, well, Dr. Mitzi, I'm just, with this new medicine that Sugarfoot is on, I mean,
Not
how many,
Sugarfoot.
if we're at a wedding reception, how many shots can they take if they
Right.
passing around tequila?
I do get that question.
And that is a great way to say, hey, she eating them pills, but she is turning up. Every time she
Right.
turn around, she drinking. Now it's, that's not going to be well received. But you can place a question like that puts the physician in a situation where they can expand. And whether or
Hmm.
not the other person wants to punch you, it's out there and it's out in the open. You've put a
Hmm.
bug in the prescriber's ear,
Hmm.
might be something for them to follow up on next time.
Mhm.
Similarly, if you notice, for instance, that someone is not taking care of what we call their activities of daily living, they're only bathing
Mhm.
3 times a week,
Right.
they're not eating, they're in the visit telling an outright lie. You know, pick and choose your battles, right? Because you don't want to get uninvited to the next
Right.
appointment.
Exactly.
But decide what is most worrisome for you in that moment and
Mhm.
try to use the opportunity to ask the question without going in there feeling like you're snitching, you're this, you're that. The
Mhm.
individual is already likely embarrassed. They already have this
Mhm.
chronic illness that requires your assistance to even get in and out of this appointment. So there's that.
Right.
But
Right.
also, they need to know that you're not in there nitpicking and placing blame. They already know
Right.
something is physically already wrong with them. The last thing a
Mhm.
person wants to feel is like you're saying that, you know, their brain is just broke all around because not only
Right.
want to, you know, let your leg work, you're also crazy.
Right. Right.
So I would say to use the visit as an opportunity to ask questions that will kind of tip off the prescriber or the physician, as well
Mhm.
as indirectly let the patient know, hey, I'm worried about this, without
Right.
saying that directly if you think
Right.
it's going to upset the relationship.
Yeah. And I think that that's important, and I do agree. If you bring somebody in there with you, then they're gonna get all the business, like But I do agree that having that perspective is extremely important. I'll give you an example. I I also would encourage my patients, to be open. If somebody is bringing up an issue,
Yeah.
they're there with you.
Yes.
They obviously are concerned about you in some capacity, and
Mhm.
often those issues or things that they bring up are because they are concerned and want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And I recently had someone that come to see me, and the person was a smoker, and the spouse was like, um, telling me that the patient was a smoker. And the patient was upset. And I'm like, well, you smell like cigarettes.
First of
Like, I
all,
mean,
we
I
know.
was like,
We
and I was
know.
like,
You smell like
I
a
was
whole
like,
stick of Marlboro
oh,
coming in
like
here.
I
We
can I'm
know.
like, I can smell it. Like, you know what I mean? But they were like adamantly upset. Like, I was like, well, what did you mark on the history? And they were like, I marked no. I always mark no. And I'm like, but you came in here smelling like cigarettes. Like, what did you expect me to think? So again, in that particular case, it was because that person was concerned about risk for other diseases and things like that. You know what I mean? People who are there with you at those visits, who see you on a day-to-day basis, if they see you struggling, they often just want, to make sure that you're getting the appropriate help that you need, or at least know about your options, right? So that you can make an informed decision about the help that you need. And so I think that is a super key. But I just was so flabbergasted, like, I can smell that you smoke, and you were gonna mark no, like, okay,
You
I
had
guess.
already marked no and
You
thought you were not going.
right. You always mark no, and you've been smoking for like 30 years. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just okay. All right. So what other things or tips can we give people to focus or help their mental wellness? Are there things that people can do, like, we know exercise can improve or boost mood. What other tips can we give people, to be aware of what's going on with them mentally, and to make sure that they're, seeking the appropriate, care, or paying the appropriate attention to what's going on with them?
Sure. I think that asking questions themselves is important. As we
Mhm.
were talking earlier, one of the things that crossed my mind randomly was that, when we were in school, we recall being taught very directly about things like estrogen and progesterone and testosterone being hormones. But guess
Mhm.
what? So is serotonin.
Mm,
But
absolutely.
the first time I think I heard serotonin referred to as that stuck, obviously was in medical school,
Mhm.
but when I was literally doing psychiatry, when in
Mm,
fact it's a hormone that has activity in your brain and in other parts of your body too,
right.
just like some of the other ones, right? So
Mhm.
for women, it's not otherworldly if we realize that 2 weeks before our cycle starts, we are trying to rip people's heads off, or as I've said about myself recently, eating everything that is not nailed down.
It's
That's
tough.
a reach mentally for us.
It's
That
tough.
makes common sense. But
Right.
the notion that another hormone can be out of whack, thereby
Mhm.
causing me to be fatigued, avoidant, more irritable,
Mhm.
that's tough. So I would say number one, if you have a question, ask. Like,
Right.
you're in a treatment relationship with someone who is taking care of you. This is not your dentist, by the way. It's your primary care doctor. No shade on the dentist, but they don't have time for that. You can't talk while they're in your mouth.
Right. I
Um,
went the other day and that was absolutely true. I was like,
it was not the time. Ask a question. Number two, I always tell people, if you have a question, just go see a therapist. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to meet a human that cannot benefit from talking to a therapist at
Mm-hmm.
least one good time. It's
Mm-hmm.
very important to have another individual that does not know you personally be able to listen to you tell the whole truth about certain things without judgment.
Mm.
Some of y'all think that your Facebook feed is your therapist.
It
It
is
is
not.
not. Neither is it your journal.
Mm.
That's not where we process heartache, disappointment, um, outrage at the political landscape.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where we process being triggered by watching people gunned down because of the color of their skin. That's not the place for that.
Mm-hmm. Because most of the people aren't your real friends in real life.
First and foremost, they're absolutely not.
Right.
But on the flip side, it's crazy. People put all sorts of stuff on there, but they won't put their weight or their hemoglobin A1C on
How
there.
about that? Or that they
Which,
smoke.
or whether or not they smoke, or whether or not they've ever, tried drugs. Like, other
Mm-hmm.
sorts of stuff people put there that it just literally doesn't belong there, but they
Mm-hmm.
won't put it where it goes. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
definitely see a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you have people around you that you really do believe love you, um, don't dismiss them if they say they're concerned.
Right.
Don't write people off and have an attitude with people if they're saying, well, maybe you should X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a sticky point too, especially with substance use. There are a lot of times when people come in, um, and the topic of substance use is broached and people gloss over it. Well, if you know that every time you see so and so, they're drinking out of a red cup, you can't be drinking out the red cup all the time.
All the time.
And the tragedy is they're not necessarily drinking out of the red cup because they want to have a good time. They drinking out of the red cup because they started one night because they couldn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And the red cup went from having a little vodka to a little vodka after the wine I had with dinner
Mm-hmm.
to Patron to, you know what I mean? It
Mm-hmm.
progresses, but we sit there and watch people walk the ladder
Right.
using something like alcohol to cope with other things that they will not go talk about. But
Right.
then now when you're getting written up on your job, is
Mm.
what we're saying, well, girl, maybe you should talk to somebody. Well, bro,
Mm.
maybe you need to talk to some. It's too late. Don't let me get
Right.
fired.
Right. It's like you said, right? With the example about the blood pressure, the earlier you start, right? When you first see those signs,
Yeah,
the easy, I won't say the easier it is, but the better off, you may wind up if you start dealing with it earlier
yeah,
than waiting until it gets completely out of control. And, with MS, one of the things that I stress is that oftentimes, having that outside person to talk with you without judgment is extremely important because many people feel burdened because of the physical difficulties they have. And so they
yeah,
may have, loved ones who have to help them around the house or help do some of these duties, or they may not be able to work in the same capacity they used to. And so, people feel bad putting extra stress on their loved ones. So they're
mm,
like, well, I've got all this physical stuff going on. I don't then want to talk to them about me feeling depressed or having anxiety because I don't want to put any additional burden on them,
yeah,
and so then they wind up kind of going within themselves and it causing more physical problems because many of the symptoms of depression, for instance, overlap with MS symptoms like
sure,
fatigue,
yeah,
like difficulty with concentration and attention, etc.
mm,
And so, the importance of having that outside person as a part of your team, that therapist, is extremely important because you don't oftentimes they don't want to tell the folks who are helping them every day because they feel guilty about the other help that they're getting and they don't
yeah,
also want to get counseling help, so to speak, from them. So thank you for pointing that out. That's an amazing point.
sure.
Anything else you'd like to share as we get ready to close? That time went by fast. Anything else you would like to share?
No, I'm actually good. I think that
Yeah.
it's been a good discussion, and hopefully the viewers will receive the sincerity and the spirit, of what
Yeah.
we said tonight, and just
Yeah.
kind of feel better about the choices that they make regarding their healthcare going forward.
Yeah, well, I love it. We always have an amazing discussion when you come on Brain Chat. Thank you for your time, and your amazing knowledge and expertise. I think, the goal of all of this is to empower people, right? We want people to live well. We want people to live their best life and
Yes,
realize that mental health is an essential part.
yes,
Just like your heart needs to be pumping, just like your lungs need to be exchanging oxygen, just like your brain neurons need to be firing, your mental health and well-being is an essential part of your overall health and wellness. And so we don't want to gloss over it. We want people to pay attention to it. And like we said earlier, if that gas tank is on E, don't
mm,
let the fumes go and don't run out of gas in the driveway. Okay. Go to the gas station and fill up, right? And while you at it, get that engine checked, get that oil changed, and get those tires rotated.
yes.
All right. So, all of that to say, thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. We had a wonderful discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning into Brain Chat, and we will see you again in 2 weeks with the next episode. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.